Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, a place for men to be empowered in their masculinity in an anti-male age. I'm your host, Brian Crawl, and today I'm going to be mansplaining to you about relationships, and more specifically, relationships as contracts, with a reading from my new book, Relationship Contracts, a way for people who don't want a traditional marriage. That's me on the cover there with my last girlfriend, a submissive of mine who I had a short-term relationship contract with. And in this book, I'm going to be introducing you to the topic of relationship contracts with Chapter 1. What are relationships? The institution of marriage is failing. In part, this is due to the fact that it is simply not a necessity for a committed relationship. Yet, unlike marriage, relationships are generally regarded as necessary, at least to most people. But this brings us to a very important set of questions. Without an institution to validate it, what is a relationship exactly? What constitutes a relationship to us so that we can know when we are in one? And perhaps most importantly, how will we know when we are in one that is committed? How can we make sure our relationship, when lacking the marital contract, ceremony, and law, is still going to be definitive and secure in its commitment? These are the questions that this book seeks to answer. But first, we must answer the question, what is a relationship exactly? Relationships all begin for the same basic reason. We have someone who we find agreeable enough that we find ourselves in accord with them on a number of things, and so we think to ourselves, I like this person. I would like to sign up to spend more time with them. Sociologically speaking, a relationship is simply a social construct in which two people are continuing to interact over a prolonged period of time. In other words, they continue to sign up to interact over time, and their mutual agreement to do so forms the basis of their relationship, and their series of interactions forms the relationship itself. Likewise, relationships all end for the same basic reason. People think to themselves, this isn't what I signed up for. I do not agree to this. It may not be those exact words verbatim, but it will be some version of that, such as, I'm not okay with this, or this doesn't work for me, or I do not like this or want this anymore, or I did not know it was going to end up being like this. This isn't what I wanted. But whatever the cause, they either do not find the person or situation or relationship agreeable anymore, and or did not know that it was going to be like this, and that this is what they had inadvertently agreed to when they signed up for their relationship, which they would not have agreed to if they had known and wish they had known sooner. So they exit their arrangement. That is what a relationship is. It is a social agreement, a verbal contract, something that you commit to and sign up for, with some sort of mutual understanding between the two of you that you are going to maintain this arrangement and things are going to be a certain way between you two. However, as the relationship ages and undergoes different situations and circumstances, different things come into play. The relationship may have started out with a certain basic agreement, but that basic agreement will not have taken into consideration everything that could have possibly come into play over the course of the time you're going to be together. These things cause complications because the partners never discussed them and what the agreement is supposed to be about them, and they may feel different ways about them. I had no idea that he would be looking at other women or paying so much attention to them at social gatherings, a woman might think. I always thought we would talk about who to vote for in elections and vote the same, and that she wouldn't be in an opposing political party, he might think. I had no idea that sometimes he would lose his temper so badly, she might think. I had no idea that she would be so closed-minded about trying new things in the bedroom, and we would be stuck having sex the same way our whole life, he might think. I had no idea that he would be spending so much time with his friends. I thought that I would be his best friend, she might think. I had no idea that she would have girls' nights out and be getting hit on by other guys, and I'd have no way of knowing if she fooled around or not, he might think. I had no idea that she was so undomesticated and wouldn't want to learn how to cook or clean, and that I would end up having to do it most of the time, he might think. I had no idea that he would end up working so much and be so preoccupied with his job, and not even give me much spending money to keep me occupied, she might think. I had no idea relationships were going to require me to work on these issues, both parties might think. I had no idea that the initial passion was going to fade and that I was not always going to feel as in love with them and instead would feel this way. Both parties are definitely going to think at times. If only the partners had somehow foreseen these possibilities and complications and spoken about them sooner so that they could have come to some sort of agreement and arrangement in their relationship that would allow for them to deal with them when they came up. But in the cases of almost any ended relationship, they hadn't. This list of common things that can come up in a relationship goes on and on. These are just general ones. There's lots of little issues that can come up that couples never would have thought of when making their commitments to each other that formulated their relationship contract or agreement. And the problem is that it is usually so simple and generic that it mainly has to do with being committed to each other sexually and committed to having a future together. And maybe a few details are thrown in there surrounding those two, but that's about it, and it is vague at best. All of the infinite number of possibilities and the myriad of aspects of a relationship dynamic in all of its complexities are never discussed until they come up. And then when they do arise, it is not too long before someone says to themselves, well, I had no idea it was going to be like this. This is not what I signed up for. They feel as though the unwritten and unspoken terms and conditions of their relationship, or what they imagined it should be, have been violated, and the relationship ends. Because to them, this issue is a violation of some unspoken rule of the relationship contract they thought they were signing non-verbally when they agreed to enter into this commitment. And the other person did not have any such rule in the contract they thought they were entering into. The terms and conditions were not clear enough to both parties involved. Even in marriage, in which the commitments are supposed to be much more clear, and you are making actual vows that are being verbally promised and thus agreed to, and there is an actual legal contract that you sign, the vows that formulate the social agreement and relationship contract are still not specific enough. For instance, I vow to love you in sickness and in health does not tell the person how they can expect you to react to them getting sick, and if you are going to be taking care of them or not. And I vow to love you for richer or poorer does not indicate what your financial and professional arrangement is going to be, and how one would react to the other losing their job, and how you two would face hard financial times together. And so, health problems and financial problems often devastate marriages because there are no agreements or arrangements or plans in place surrounding these two things. And they are things that everyone goes through at times in life, and they put an incredible strain on a relationship. A strain which is much worse and can be difficult for it to bear if the partners have not arranged and agreed upon specific roles and relationship plans and protocols for such occurrence. A relationship that is not structured well enough is not going to be able to undergo this kind of strain without breaking. And this is just for marriages. And of course, we all know that most marriages these days are failing, probably due to not having made the proper arrangements for all of the variables that can come into play in a relationship over the course of time. But most people in relationships are not getting married these days, and a committed relationship before marriage is going to be much more vague in its agreements than that, and thus more prone to end before even getting to the point of marriage. And that is a relationship in which serious commitments have been made, which of course many people do not get to because they have too casual an attitude and are just casually dating and avoid making any kind of commitments or agreements with those they are dating because they like to keep it casual. And if you want to keep it casual, that's fine, and you certainly should when you are first seeing someone, because you cannot be making commitments to someone you do not know enough to depend upon the character of yet. However, if you have been dating someone for half a year or more, you should feel that you know them enough to depend upon them. And if you plan to continue to invest your time in developing a relationship with them and see them as becoming a long-term partner who you are getting ready to commit to, you will want to think about and discuss with them the types of agreements that are going to make up your relationship. Otherwise, sooner or later, something is going to come up that takes you both by surprise, which one person will take issue with and feel as though it violates what they thought constituted their relationship contract and its terms and conditions. That a committed relationship should not have X or Y happening in it. And instead of having this happen after having a relationship with someone for a year or two, and then having to end it, and then going back to dating and having the same thing happen in another relationship and another again and again and again, why not just discuss these things ahead of time and make sure you are both agreeing to the same thing? Relationships have complex dynamics, and the longer you spend together, the more variables are at play. It is important, if you want a long-term, lasting relationship, that you discuss exactly what constitutes this relationship and what you are agreeing to, especially if you are planning a future together. You need to consider this like a formal relationship contract. That way, both parties know exactly what to expect from each other, what they are signing up for, what each partner's role in the relationship dynamic is, how different aspects of life and variables that come into play will be dealt with, and how both partners are going to work together to manage the relationship and grow it over time to ensure its success rather than its decay. There need to be clear terms and conditions that make the relationship dynamic what it is and give it solid structure. Otherwise, it won't be able to sustain itself. And in this book, we are going to discuss different aspects and dynamics of relationship structure and the different levels of relationship contracts, which I'm going to do from both a social science standpoint, but also a personal one based upon my own data that I've collected, based upon my experience with relationships as someone who is a sociological thinker, a spiritual person who's done a lot of thinking about the concept of marriage, and also someone who's involved in the world of BDSM, which has its own unique and complex system for relationships and special relationship contracts. And that is where I learned just how important relationship contracts are. Because in order for a relationship to be sustainable, it needs to have solid structure, terms, and conditions. We have traditionally seen a basic version of this in marriage contracts and vows, which are certainly on the right track about this, but their vows are vague and aren't specific terms and conditions. And while their legal contracts are about specific terms and conditions, they really only account for the monetary side of things, since that is what the legally binding portion of the contract is for. And you do not need a legally binding contract for a committed relationship to work. You simply need to lay everything that you would agree to out on the table and make sure that both parties agree to the same things and make a conscious decision to sign up for this agreement before making their commitments to one another. You will need to negotiate a lot of different aspects of the relationship dynamic itself, and then a lot of what-if scenarios for future planning to make sure your relationship is prepared to function under any circumstances. In order to be successful, the relationship needs to have a solid structure, which is built upon a solid foundation of commitment in both parties knowing exactly what they are committing themselves to and having all of the right agreements and terms and conditions in place. And like any legal contract, they should account for any potential possibilities and thus be airtight. You need to set some ground rules, boundaries, and limitations, protocols, formalities, plans, and procedures to ensure that the relationship is solid and successful. And you need to get all of these terms and conditions in writing, because otherwise, just a couple months later, you will certainly find yourselves in an argument with the old he said, she said, in which one partner remembers agreeing to one thing and the other remembers agreeing to something else. This is why, even if you do not like the idea of thinking of a relationship as an actual contract because it is too business-like and thus seems anti-romantic and lacking in sentimentality, it is an absolute must. And there is no reason it cannot be romantic, sentimental, or special either. But rather, it does not have to seem like a sterile business contract. It can, in fact, be very romantic, sentimental, and special. If this is a love relationship, it should be. And regardless of your connection, it should be one of the most meaningful things in your relationship. Not just sociologically speaking, but emotionally as well. And even spiritually if you two have a spiritual connection. The institution that has the best system for doing this is not actually traditional marriage contracts, but BDSM contracts. Whether you are into BDSM or not, or how kinky you are, is not the issue here. It doesn't matter if you are a very sexually conservative type that does not like the idea of BDSM, because BDSM is not just about hardcore sex, and that is not what this is about. This is about the types of relationships and relationship contracts that exist in the BDSM world, in which two people have relationships with very definitive roles, dynamics, agreements, and structure between them, and how everyone else attempting to have relationships can benefit from how it is done there to ensure that theirs is successful. You see, in BDSM, two partners come together and negotiate all aspects of their relationship that will come into play in their relationship dynamic. And then, when they come to an agreement about everything, they write it out in a contract. These contracts are very thorough and meant to cover all necessary details, but they are still actually also very poetic, so they can also be as romantic as you like. And I will give you an example later on. But first, before you can even formulate a relationship contract that will give yours the structure it needs to succeed, you need to negotiate with your prospective partner. To negotiate a healthy, working, sustainable, successful, and long-lasting relationship, you need to have good communication skills. If you do not, I would highly recommend reading a few good books or taking a class or two on communication. You are simply not going to be able to have a good relationship without good communication. But if you are ready, willing, and able to communicate honestly, clearly, and precisely, and about things that are not easy to communicate about, and your partner is as well, you are ready to negotiate the terms of your relationship. However, your partner must be ready, willing, and able to do so as well, and thus they must also possess the capacity for good communication. If not, they will also need to read some books and or take some classes on it before you can have a good relationship with them. But once you two are perfectly ready to begin the process of negotiation, I will now show you how it is done in BDSM. In the world of BDSM, I'm dominant. This simply means that I have a dominant personality type, and thus I enjoy being in control and taking charge of most any situation and being the leader of it, and taking most of the responsibility for most aspects of the situation. This is basically the same role as the traditional patriarchal head of household, and in many ways is tied to this custom. The converse personality type to that is a submissive, who is more passive and prefers not to be in control and to be subordinate to others in authority, and enjoys being a follower and taking direction from others. This is similar to the traditional female role of the housewife, and in many ways is influenced by this tradition. Though a dominant, of course, does not have to be a man, and a submissive does not have to be a woman. But regardless of gender, almost all people fall into one of these categories. In rare cases, they can switch between the two roles in different instances. It is important to know which one of these you are and which your partner is. Relationships between one dominant and one submissive partner are most complementary and compatible in their contrasting roles, and thus easiest to make work. Relationships between two dominant or two submissive types are much more difficult to make work because of the fact that these roles are not complementary to each other and not compatible. For instance, I have two sets of biological grandparents. One set was both dominant personality types. The other was a dominant and a submissive personality type. Which of those two do you think stayed together for over 50 years and died together? And which of those two do you think divorced after a short time? It was the dom-sub combination that has stayed together for the majority of a century. The two dominant personalities found themselves in constant power struggles in which they were both trying to take charge of the situations they were in. They clashed and thus divorced. This could, however, have been avoided if they had the proper agreements to the terms and conditions of their relationship in place so that each could take turns switching back and forth between who was in charge. But they did not. And it is simply going to be naturally easier for one dominant person and one submissive person to make a relationship work because these roles are much more compatible due to how they complement each other. Myself, being a dominant, will describe to you the process of vetting submissive partners and negotiating relationship terms and conditions from my point of view as the dom in a dom-sub relationship dynamic. If you are not a dominant in BDSM, don't worry. The same things will still apply to you, just in different terms. If you are a patriarchal man, it will be very similar terminology. You may just want to use the word man or head of household when creating your relationship contract. However, you do not have to be a man in a dominant role either. The very same thing could be done as a submissive person. You would just have to switch the terms dominant and submissive, and also swap out the term serving for caregiving, and any other terms you wish to swap out, and you will also want to remove some, if not all, of the elements of authority that I would have as a dom. If you do not identify with either the term dominant or submissive, you can swap out these terms for any other terms you want to, such as partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, lover, mate, husband, wife, etc. Any sort of roles in terminology will work. The information that is being asked will essentially be the same for all of them. For authenticity purposes, I will be keeping my description of the process completely accurate and unedited so that you can see exactly how it is done for my formalized and highly technical purposes in BDSM. And then you can customize the process to your own relationship paradigm, which is something you would have to do no matter what language I was using. And that is the end of chapter 1 of my book, Relationship Contracts, a way for people who don't want a traditional marriage. But that is the only chapter I'm going to be doing a reading of. So if you want to read more, you're going to have to get your own copy by clicking the link below. It is a really great book. It will teach you exactly how to create the relationship dynamic and structure and contract that you want, as well as giving you an actual contract template to customize and use for yours. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and make sure that you are subscribed and that your subscription is set to all so that you're notified when the next video comes out. And otherwise, take care of yourselves, men, because no woman out there is going to.